What's your I finally met my online friend horror story? Story 1. Back during WoW's second expansion, there was this guy in my guild I'd become friends with mostly through other friends. We talked more and more over time and became fairly close. He had this asshole roommate, and I could hear the guy sometimes, especially when something went wrong during a raid. He'd scream and throw fits. He was pretty awful sounding. My friend told me he wasn't just loud and obnoxious, but verbally and sometimes physically abusive too. I had my own apartment, so I said, you know what, come stay with me. Just long enough to get you on your feet and into a place that's safe. He showed up at my place with a trash bag full of his stuff and a laptop. I set him up in the apartment and started trying to help him find a job. Well, he did not want a job. He did not get a job either. He sat in my apartment, day after day, eating my food and slowly draining my savings. No matter how hard I tried to get him motivated, he would just dig in his heels and somehow become more sedentary. Eventually, I told him he had to go. I couldn't afford to keep him there. He was just couch surfing. I spoke to some people and eventually pieced together that his method of securing a new temporary place was playing on the sympathies of his friends to convince them he was in a terrible living situation. It just worked really well on me because he had that loud, obnoxious roommate to play off of. He wound up calling a nearby relative to come and get him, I think his aunt. I don't know what he told her I supposedly did, but I have never seen a more venomous look from someone in my life. As far as I know, he moved in with his sister and brother-in-law after that, but frankly, I don't care where he ended up. He also stole a bunch of my stuff. First and last time I do anything like that. Story 2. Guy I knew in college met a girl online and spent every day talking about her. She lived about 6 hours away, so he planned to take a semester off and pursue this relationship. He got a job in her town and asked if I'd help him move out there since my car would hold more than he could take on a bus. I had a long weekend off and figured, why not? A road trip could be fun. I'd drag him out as a goodbye present, and on the way back I planned to visit Yellowstone. Well, we arrive, and it turns out he doesn't have an apartment lined up, and he found a job posting in his girlfriend's town. He hadn't actually gotten the job, or even applied yet. I make a bunch of phone calls and find him a room to rent that will let him move in that day with just first, last, and deposit, even without a job. I'm tired and disgusted with his lack of planning, but figure it's worth staying the night and trying to end things on good terms with my buddy. Then he breaks down and confesses that he hasn't actually met this girl. The nights he spent video chatting with her were really just him watching her vlog and jacking it. They've never talked, never texted, never even emailed. Hell, he's never even left so much as a comment or like on one of her videos. She genuinely didn't, still doesn't, know he existed. His plan was to hang out at this game shop she talks a lot about until she showed up, and somehow create a relationship from that. He thought that they'd meet and she'd fall in love with him, and move back to our college town to marry him, all before the next semester began. That didn't happen. Instead, I made my buddy buy a bus ticket for his ride back to school and left. He came back to school and got more cringy, not less. I lost track of him after that. Story 3. This is way back in the mid-90s. Bulletin board systems were all the rage. I made friends with this guy from NC. He was friends with a bunch of us from my dorm, mostly females, which should probably have been a red flag, but I was extremely naive at the time. A couple months in, he mentioned he was coming to our state for a wedding and asked if he could come by our college to meet everyone. It was agreed he'd sleep in my dorm room since my roommate was almost never around. Now there was no discussion or thought of sex, but I was pretty excited to meet this guy and see if he was as funny and charming as he was online. Well, day arrives, dude shows up. I should mention that I and all my college friends were 18 or 19. This guy was 24, or so he said. Guy looked like, and I'm not exaggerating, a cancer patient. Pale, gaunt features, long greasy pale blonde hair except where he was bald on top, and just generally looked like he was about to die, or he was dressed as a ghoul for Halloween. He insisted on hugging all of us. I was trying to remind myself that looks don't matter, and that he was a cool guy despite his very unsettling appearance. But then, when we all started hanging out, things just got worse. He was asking really invasive questions of all of us, making weird comments to whatever was said, just all around creepy and distressing. I was sitting on the floor with another friend and actively rocking back and forth from discomfort. I lied and said I had hurt my back and that sleeping on the floor helped, because that night he kept insisting we could share my tiny twin college bed. Nope, 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 nope. Last time I ever met anyone from that site. Story 4. He and I were part of the same forum many, many years ago. He was dealing with his issues, and I was dealing with mine. I think we both went there to escape, where people wouldn't judge. Also, because we were bored. I'm not quite sure when we got properly talking. I think it's when he told a terrible joke about kipper ties. We used to share everything with each other, over NSN. I'd give him advice about his love life, and he'd listen to all my fuck-ups. It took quite a few fuck-ups before we eventually met up. I think I already knew we were in love, but seeing him in person really cemented it. We decided to give it a go, even though we lived 300 miles away from each other. We had a lot of ups and downs. I was distant. He lived with his ex-girlfriend for a bit, even though she didn't have a job and couldn't afford her half of the rent. The same ex-thief who I'd given him advice on, who he had nicknamed Trouble, and liked to claim she was pregnant every so often. We got over that, along with many other things, and finally moved in with each other. I thought our issues were gonna be solved when there was no distance between us. In the end, we were just very different people who wanted very different things, and the distance wasn't gonna change that. We broke up after 3.5 years together. None of that's a horror story. Not the way he treated me. Not the fact he probably cheated on me. Not that I wasn't a priority and used to cry myself to sleep. About 1.5 years after breaking up, he gets back in touch and we talk like it was in the beginning, when we were friends. After a few weeks, he asked if I wanted to get back together. I said no. I told him that he'd broken my heart again. The next day, I got a phone call from his work because I was still his emergency contact asking me if I knew where he was because he hadn't turned up. The police got in touch too. The last phone call that day was from his mom, to let me know that he killed himself. Story 5. I don't know if it's a horror story, but it is how I ended up where I live now. I played WoW for years with a pretty regular group, got to know them offline, and at one point 2 of them, a couple, invited me to move across the country. At the time I didn't have anything tying me to where I was, so I packed up and moved. Got out here, moved in with my friends, and everything seemed okay. My buddy was a long-haul driver, so he was always gone for days at a time. His girl would try to set me up multiple times with 2 of her friends at the same time, one in Minnesota. I ended up having a hard time finding work for a while. Finally got a job though and was putting some money away while helping watch their kids. Out of nowhere one day my buddy accuses me of trying to fool around with his girl. Nothing had ever happened, but I had noticed her spending more and more time in my room when he wasn't there. I knew his history, and his previous relationship had ended after she cheated with a friend of his. He wouldn't listen, so I got kicked out without any warning, and they stole about $1,000 worth of my stuff and later moved. Ultimately, it all worked out for me. Cut the friend and his girl out of my life completely and moved on. Now I have a good job here, wife and kids. Story 6. After college ended, I was playing a game called EVE Online. I was in a corporation with a dude who I thought was the coolest. He had sold shit in-game for real-world money and had built a supercomputer. He had a smoking hot girlfriend and had pictures of them rock climbing doing some super cool shit. He was also like a head chef where he worked, and since I was a chef as well, I had a little bit of a bromo crush on him. He told me after I graduated that he could hook me up with a manager job, and all I had to do was move up there. I sold everything I owned that day at a pawn shop and bought a U-Haul and started driving. 1 hour before I got there, it was like a week-long drive. He called me and told me the job was no longer available and I shouldn't come. When he found out how close I was, he said to just come anyways. When I got there, I was completely blown away. They lived in a disgusting Section 8 apartment with 4 other people in a 1-bedroom apartment. They had like 3 cats, which I'm allergic to, and a kid as well. Day 1, it was all drugs and partying. I did not partake. I was not enthused. Day 2, I went into the city looking for a shit job to survive. I got one. It was shit. Day 3, my buddy tells me we're all are moving out and into a nice apartment. Week 3, we actually move into a new apartment. And the first night in that apartment, he starts beating his smoking hot girl in front of their kid. The second time he beat her, I called the cops. Him and his girl immediately said I was the bad guy and that they were just loving each other. They had the cops escort me from the apartment. So there I was, 1,700 miles away from home, homeless at 2 a.m., and it's fucking raining on all my shit. Lars, you are a sack of shit, and I hope you die of space herpes. Story 7. I've been active in numerous online communities over the years, and have been fortunate enough to hang out with many of the friends I've made there in person. There's only been one incident I couldn't cope with. He picked me up at the airport, which was very nice of him, and as soon as we got into the car, he started picking his nose. There's a lot that goes through your mind when you hop into a vehicle with someone you've never been alone with, and you immediately catch them 2 knuckles deep in their rostrum. I looked quickly away so that he wouldn't know I caught him and be embarrassed if he was just trying to sneak one out before I noticed. If he did notice, he didn't seem embarrassed, so I relaxed a little. I guessed maybe he was just so confident about himself and our friendship that he'd ascended past caring if I saw him take care of a quick boog. Fine. Sure. When I finally looked back at him, he was wiping his fingers across his dashboard. To this day, I'm not really sure what to think, but this guy spent the entirety of the few hours we were together scooping out boogers and wiping them off on parts of his car or the table or wherever it was that we'd stopped at. I realized I was being transported in a rolling booger shrine, and that there was nothing I could touch without needing to wash my hands. I was sitting on a crust of fossilized booger stuff. I had to be. I didn't want to hurt his feelings. He was a nice dude. But I wound up rolling out of our visit early because I couldn't handle it. I don't consider myself a clean freak, but as wiping started to stack, it was all I could do not to throw open the passenger door and roll myself out into traffic to escape. I still wonder if I should have done or said anything to save him some grief in the future, but it didn't feel like it was my place, you know. What do you even say? Story 8. A couple of years ago, this girl messaged me on Reddit saying she really connected with a comment I made about first seeing the ocean because she had just gone through a similar experience. She was going to come down to Chicago to visit a friend of hers and asked for suggestions of things to do. I gave her a bunch, and then we kept talking and finding out we had more and more in common. We eventually started talking over the phone and text messages, and when she came down, we went out for burgers and beer. We kept talking every day after that, and I was really starting to like her. She said she wanted to come down to Chicago again, and if she could stay with me. I told her of course, and a few weeks later she was here for Saturday and Sunday. Really, it was mostly Sunday because she got in late on Saturday and fell asleep on my couch. The next day, we went to the zoo and had a really amazing day. After that, we came back to my place and decided to go to the brewery nearby, which made a beer that had her name in it. We went there and then ended up bar hopping through until we ended up near the dive bar by my apartment. We drank and played pool there and eventually grabbed some to-go beers and headed back. I asked if she wanted to see the place by the river. I like to go and drink and think. We sat and eventually started making out, and decided to head back to my apartment. We hooked up, and then the next day went to the south side to get breakfast at a place she really liked near her friend's apartment before she had to drive back. We kept talking after that, and I was planning on coming up to visit her in Detroit, but then one day she just ghosted me out of nowhere. Not as horrible as some other stories, but it was really shitty for me because I actually really liked this girl, and to this day, I have no idea why she stopped talking to me.